Dissociative identity disorder used to be known as multiple personality disorder, and I think that's what most people are familiar with, right?
Correct, correct.
And this is your own story. This is your own journey. When did you realize, or perhaps you didn't realize, you had this DID, this dissociative identity disorder?
I think I'm like a lot of people who have the disorder. You don't come with the diagnosis, and many times because providers don't understand DID, they misidentify it as some other thing like anxiety or depression or personality disorders of other types. And so for me, it was I was 30 years old, but I had also had many, many years of misdiagnosis before someone, and I kind of knew it was wrong the whole time. I knew something wasn't right, but I really didn't know what it was. And so someone at the age of 30 said, "This is what I think you have." And then that opened up really, my healing.
How many alternative identities did you have?
Interestingly, it does not ever stay steady. So it's not something you can say, "Oh, I have this many or that many." But I would say currently 16 to 18, somewhere in that range.
So you still are afflicted with this disorder?
Yes and no. I I don't ever consider myself as having one personality. However, no one around me would have any idea.
Hmm.
So it's a matter of choosing really that. I mean, I think for me the personalities were so solidly formed that it did never make sense to just sort of blur them into one.
Hmm.
Some people do choose that. I did not.
Yeah. Tell us about The Fortress. The book is written by The Fortress. Tell us about
Yeah.
that aspect of it.
The fortress is the name we call ourselves, and it was a name that came up early, probably as a teen, as to identify sort of that sense of complete protection. So the fortress has no windows and doors. It's kind of a way to wall yourself off from an intolerable world. And so, we just call it the fortress. And so yeah, inside the fortress, it sort of, if you think about it, sort of a combination of ages from children alters to adult alters who would really kind of run the show in sort of not necessarily a democratic way, but kind of with what makes sense in any given part of our lives.
You say at 30 you finally got a good diagnosis or the
Yes.
correct diagnosis. What happened at that point? What put you on your path to healing, and what was that path to healing like?
So for me, I was seeing a therapist who did not really understand the disorder because she had just started learning about it, and she wasn't really capable of treating it. However, at one point when she just got to her moment of most frustration, she said, "I think I know what you have, and I think it's DID." And as soon as she said it, it was just like the light bulbs went off.
Hmm.
I was literally carrying journals that I knew were signed by other people, written by other people within the fortress. So children, alters, and teen alters that I personally didn't understand. As soon as she said it, I reached into my bag and I said, "Here," because I hadn't shared those before. And so it was very, very clear that obviously there was no other reason to explain why these were there.
So what did your recovery entail? Was it medication? Was it therapy? Tell us what your recovery entailed. Was it just the acknowledgement? Maybe there is no recovery. I don't know.
There is. I mean, years of recovery. So, medications are almost always a part of somebody with DID's life, partly because they are depressed or they are anxious. I don't take any medications now, and I don't need them. But at one time I did. However, so when you discover there's the fortress, there is, I guess I'll call it self-hatred. One faction hates the other faction. One person internally hates the other person. And so that's how it shows up, sort of that self-harm, suicidality, depression. But really, it's sort of I guess I would say self-hatred. So that the years of therapy afterward really involves figuring out so having each part tell their story and sort of learning that sense of, oh, well, I might not have the same experience as someone else in the fortress, but I understand. So it is like having a team that finally understands each other and works to support each other. And that's as close to self-love as I could
Mm.
even imagine.
When you talk about the fortress, you're basically talking about a collection of your multiple personalities or multiple
Correct.
identities. Yeah.
Correct.
Um, what was the trigger? Why do you think this happened to you? Was it genetic? Was it environmental?
I think some of the tendency towards DID is, I'm not going to say genetic, but sort of inborn.
Mhm.
It tends to be someone who's somewhat creative. It tends to be the same kind of child who has a an invisible friend.
Right.
But in my case, it was very, very early child abuse in infancy
Mm.
that really sort of progressed to when DID, they believe, most likely forms, which is about the age of 3 to 4, about the same age that a kid has an invisible friend. Only in our case, whatever invisible friend it was really an internal thing. And so you start to split off parts of you that you don't want. So if something bad happens, in order to get up and go to school or daycare or whatever, you can't have that other part be there. You can't be walking around knowing this happened to you. So it literally happens to someone else
Yeah.
inside the fortress. And so
Right.
you just wall it off. And then it becomes sort of easier. So
Mm.
then you just wall off the work parts of you and the personal parts of you and the uh, it just becomes so much easier to just split off and separate, not really knowing how to integrate those parts of you.
Mm. Yeah, it's fascinating. How distinct were the different personalities or identities for you? Not very, or just a little bit different, just a different name. Tell us about how different
There's
the different.
always different names, and I would say there are fairly distinct personalities.
Mm.
So, I mean, again, if you're talking about a child personality versus an adult logical self, that's very different. But
Mm.
there are also personalities that are very sassy and just kind of oppositional, kind of your classic goth teen type personality, who'd have to be very different from the type that
Mm.
went up and went to college and grew up. So if you think about yourself, how you maybe were as a teen to how you are now it's different. But for us, that teen part is still there and still operating and still can just pop out at any moment. Now they don't right now because
Mhm.
that's a pretty well solid thing. So if that teen part popped out, it would be by choice, by sort of democratic choice that was the best part to be there.
Mm. So choice is what I was going to ask you. Was it ever a conscious decision of like, today I'm going to be Brenda. Brenda's cool. Brenda gets along with people. Brenda has no issues from her past, that kind of thing?
That part wouldn't have been choice. That part would have been just survival,
Mhm.
and that Brenda would be that logical choice because that would be the one that probably would get along the best
Mhm.
and do the best in school, for example.
Mhm.
So if you really want to achieve and do what you need to do in school, you can have another part that's traumatized and still living with that trauma. So we had parts that who were traumatized, but they don't have a recollection of themselves healing. They're still there.
Mhm.
Even to this day, that those parts are still in that trauma. Now we can comfort that child and we can say, you're okay. You don't need to be triggered
Mhm.
by this. So it doesn't ever become a problem. But at some point in our lives, it became a huge problem.
Yeah. And how did it become a huge problem? How did it manifest itself as a huge problem?
I think if you think about things like PTSD having a trigger, or maybe someone with PTSD who's triggered by a gunshot or
Mhm.
just some other trauma in their life, you don't have control over that. And so that would lead to anxiety or self-harm or a suicidal gesture that you just didn't have control over. And so even though there were successful parts of me, there were also very, very hurt parts that just never healed.
Yeah. Do you think everybody, and I know you're not in everybody else's skin, but it's just an opinion kind of thing. Everybody kind of crafts your own identity to a certain way. Like you think of yourself as funny, you think of yourself as clever, and you react to other people in that way. So we're all crafting our
Absolutely.
identities, don't you think?
Absolutely. I liken it to people who have a certain work personality
Mhm.
and a personality they have with their buddies, on a Friday night. And so I say, well, imagine going to a party where everyone in your life is there.
Right.
Your boss and your buddies. How do you act? It's sort of like
Mm.
really how you don't know how to act, because
Right.
then you realize that yes, the part of you that's at work and the part of you that's not at work are very different. So you
Let,
have crafted even in your everyday life that
yeah.
personality switch.
Exactly. I'm going to act one way with the boss, one way with a colleague, one way with my wife. That's just how it
Exactly.
works. Yeah. Let me ask you about the Hollywood notion of DID, which is like suddenly Christine is Cynthia, and
Mm-hmm,
Cynthia is completely unaware of
mm-hmm.
Christine, and Christine is completely unaware of Cynthia. That might not be your story, but it's some people's story, right?
It is some people's story, yes.
Yeah.
And I feel so bad for them because really it is terrifying.
Mm.
The very few times where I've experienced that, it has been terrifying, but it's few and far between. Mostly it's a sense of saying something or behaving in a way that isn't you, but you have no control over it. So I call it living in the back seat of a car, so that someone else is driving the car, but you know what's happening. So in most cases, it isn't a complete switch where you don't know that that switch has happened.
It's fascinating. It really is, as you can tell from all of my questions. Let me ask you this. What do you hope readers take away from it?
I think I hope there are some readers out there that say this could be me and who get the right kind of help. And I honestly hope that therapists who are most therapists are very uncomfortable. They feel like they can't possibly do that. However,
Mm.
my own therapist who has helped me heal the most had never seen anyone who had DID knowingly. And yet she was brave enough to try. So it's that. And then I guess just that trauma happens to everyone in varying degrees, and that you really can get to a place where you love yourself in spite of what happened.
Yeah. It also sounds like it's a spectrum disorder. Like I said,
Yes,
people are on this end of the spectrum. They act one way with the boss, another way with their colleagues. And then it goes from gradients there to the point where some people have it where they have two distinct personalities or multiple distinct personalities or identities, and they're not aware of each other. And then probably most of the people with DID fall somewhere in the middle of those two extremes, right?
completely,
Yeah.
completely. And I think that's the last thing I want people to know. I think the other Hollywood version is that all people with DID are in prison for killing someone. There's a lot of those stories out for, somebody did this because of multiple personalities. And honestly, that's not true.
Yeah.
And so I think getting past that also helps people heal.